Take a deep breath in and let it go. Now, the title of the talk this week is, Why Do You Keep Telling Me to Breathe? And there are a bunch of reasons that we do that. Because breathing is in two categories, and we can use that as a guidepost. So we can consciously and intentionally choose when we want to breathe. And if we're not paying attention, our body will do that anyway. Just as an experiment, take a deep breath and hold it as long as you can, and wait until your body starts telling you it's time to breathe again. Anybody believe that's not going to happen? Give it a try right now. Deep breath in and hold it. I'm not going to, because I practice this at home. You can continue this as long as you like. If somebody falls over, you'll start breathing again right after that. And the reason we like to talk about breathing is because breathing is always in the moment. I find that I have been involved in several recreational activities or sports where breathing is a big deal thing. The current one is yoga. And actually, the way that coincidence works is the yoga instructor this morning was talking about breathing. Because when we are sitting in meditation, the only part of us that's not on the purple pillow or the yoga mat or in that particular moment, the only part of us is not is our mind. Everything else can be focused right there in the moment. So when we turn our attention to our breath and follow the breath into our body and follow the breath out of our body, we stay in the moment. Our mind is thinking about what's going to happen next, and what's going to happen for brunch, and what's going to happen in the impeachment trial, and what's going to happen with climate change, and then we go into the things that happened in the past, and the things, what happened when I was in 5th grade that was bad, that I still feel bad about, or what should I have done at a different time. Our minds can go crazy and just be completely wrapped up in thinking. Now, we shouldn't blame our minds for thinking. That's all they can do. That's all our mind can do is think. So it's not to blame. It just does that. We just let it off duty from time to time. Anybody still holding their breath, by the way? Yeah, I didn't think so. No, you're not. So we can use our breath as a tool to stay in the moment, to stay right here and right now. Now, when we hold our breath, how many of you have actually held your breath on an exhale? Sometimes just to try it. But when anxiety grips you, and when you're tense, it's always at the top of an inhale. So when somebody comes to me for counseling, when they've got a big problem going on, the first thing I tell them is to breathe out. Because the breathing in is taking care of itself. What I've noticed is that some people, without paying any attention, will hold their breath while they're in the middle of doing something because their attention is focused, and they'll breathe in, and they'll go, and they'll take another breath in. And the interesting part is, even though everybody around you can notice that you're doing it, we're usually very unaware of when we're doing that. One of my other sports is rock climbing. And I was getting a lesson from actually a friend of mine who very good climber. And it was lead climbing, which is where instead of having the rope that goes up to the pulley overhead and your friend pulls you up, you bring the rope with you and you clip it in along the way, which is much more terrifying. And I was climbing sort of overhang. And she's about 25, 30 feet below me, and she says, "Something wrong with the air up there?" And I said, "No." She says, "Then maybe you want to breathe." And I hadn't noticed that I wasn't breathing. I was ready to argue with her, but I was distracted by the terror of the situation, so I didn't. And the idea is, when we bring ourselves back to the present moment, when we bring ourselves back to our breath, we are right here and right now. Because everything that hasn't happened yet is possible. We live in a universe of infinite potential, and we can invite whatever it is that we want. When we're holding our breath, we're paying attention to what happened in the past. What we're creating is a new version of that. We can be intentional and decide what we want to be creating next. Breathe into this moment now and understand that everything that I'm looking for could in fact be looking for me. and the gifts that I'm seeking could already be at hand. Those possibilities keep on coming up over and over and over again. The first sport that I got involved in that's all about breathing was actually before I found my spiritual path. I spent 20 years or so wandering in the desert between the time that I gave up my religion of origin and got into discovered New Thought. And I was living in South Florida. It was about 30 years ago. And I took up scuba diving because that's, other than golf, that's what there is to do in South Florida. I guess you can do tennis too, shuffleboard. But I wasn't old enough for shuffleboard at that point. Is anybody here a scuba diver?
I did it once.
Okay. There are, the first rule of scuba diving, never hold your breath. The second rule of scuba diving, never forget rule number 1. And it's actually pretty important, not holding your breath. So, and in fact, it's so important that those are the 2 rules. And the third rule of scuba diving actually has a lot to do with the first 2. So, and it's never hold your breath. It's emphatic and it's negative. Never hold your breath. Well, it turns out most people think that the scariest, most dangerous thing that can happen to a scuba diver is to be eaten by a shark. That never happens. That never happens because a scuba diver underwater is making all these noises and bubbles and stuff, and the sharks are, I don't know what that is, but it doesn't belong here. So I'm probably just going to stay away from it. The other thing that we think is that could be dangerous is the bends. And that's true, that can be dangerous. And that's the third rule, is to ascend in an orderly fashion. And then people think, well, maybe it's drowning, getting lost at sea, something like that. It turns out that drowning is breathing in water, which is, on a scale of good to bad, is bad. But it's treatable. You know, it drags them back on the boat and get the water out of their lungs and CPR them back to life. And actually it happens routinely. I mean, it's not part of scuba diving. It's like somebody's going to get saved from a drowning incident, but it's relatively commonplace. I'm pretty sure there's only one person in the room who understands why scuba divers shouldn't hold their breath other than me. And that's Jo, because she worked at a facility and actually managed 3 hyperbaric chambers for a while. And it's the same thing. We never hold our breath in scuba diving because as we descend in the water, the pressure on us increases. So at the surface, we have 1 atmosphere of pressure, which is the entire column of the atmosphere above us. Go down 33 feet, we're at 2 atmospheres. Go down 66 feet, it's 3 atmospheres. And the farther down we go, what happens is 1 breath of air, when I get down to 165 feet, more on that story in a little bit, I'm at 6 atmospheres. Every breath is like 6 breaths at the surface. Not a problem. Breathe in, breathe out. I'm using the air out of my tank much more quickly. In fact, it would be 6 times as fast. Actually, it's much faster than that because at the surface, I don't actually need to use the tank.
Thank you.
That was for breathing. The problem happens is that our lungs are really good at breathing out. They squeeze in. And breathing in. And they expand. What they're really not, and as if you take a breath and you descend, then the air in your lungs compresses. But if somebody were to take a full breath of air at 6 atmospheres and then ascend while holding their breath, it would make their lungs hold 110 or 120% of capacity or 600% of capacity. And it turns out lungs are really bad at that. It's called a lung overexpansion injury, and they are tremendously dangerous. So, in a controlled environment, Jo knows people who would be willing to treat 1 or 2 of the injuries that can come about from that. You can talk to her about that later. It's pretty graphic. It's called pneumothorax. But on a dive boat, not so much. But then again, when somebody's underwater holding their breath and has this injury, they're underwater. So, really bad situation. So, hence, the first rule of scuba diving, never hold your breath. And the second rule of scuba diving, never forget rule number 1. And by training ourselves, as we get into scuba diving, and by the way, the most dangerous, the biggest change in pressure is in like the top 6 or 8 feet of water. It's where we go from 1 atmosphere to much more than 1 atmosphere. So this is dangerous in a swimming pool if somebody's breathing compressed air. If you're breathing with a snorkel, not a problem because the air is coming in from 1 atmosphere. And I don't want to alarm you. By the way, if you want to go scuba diving, take a class. The first thing they're going to teach you is the first rule of scuba diving. And this is going to be a lot of exercise and activity before you get into the pool with the gear. Because the important thing is to remain safe. And once we're safe and we're able to follow rule number 1 and rule number 2 and rule number 3, then we can go scuba diving. And I love scuba diving. I probably did, I don't know, over 100 dives a year. And at one point, I've told this story before. At one point, we were diving in Cozumel, and the authorities in Cozumel say you shouldn't go deep diving. There's nothing to see. There's nothing to do. It's dangerous below 100 feet. The way that Cozumel, Mexico is set up, you know those pinnacles out west where there's this little, and then there's a huge cliff that goes, that's basically what Cozumel is. So the top is flat, but it's got a 3,000-foot wall. And they say just the top 100 feet is where, that's where you should go. Well, my friends and I were into technical deep scuba diving, so the first dive was about 205 feet on a friend's boat. And the second dive, my buddy and I decided that we would just walk across the street from the hotel, swim out to the wall, dive down, and let the current carry us into town and take a cab back. No dive boat required. So we did that, and we're diving, and we rented the air tanks from the little hut across the street from the hotel. And one of them was a light fill. It didn't have as much air as the other one. So I took the one with a light fill. And we're out there, and we're diving down, about 163 feet on this dive. And I noticed, because I'm at 6 atmospheres and every breath is like 6 breaths, it's like, yeah, I don't have nearly as much air as I would like to have. So I tap on my buddy and I show him what my air is. He goes, we start ascending immediately, and he gives me his spare regulator so we can share some of the extra air that he has in his tank. Now, I wasn't going to run out, but I wanted to have some air left in the tank when I got to the surface so I could make my way in without having a crisis or an emergency. So we ascended. Everything was safe and okay. I remember breaking the surface, having been in that situation where I might not have enough air. And that was a breath that I remember. Now, most people don't have a particular breath that you remember. We've been breathing in and breathing out, we have reason to believe, since our birthday, the original one. And it just happens automatically. Sometimes we can bring our attention to it, but we don't have to. So when we take a deep breath in, we can bring ourselves right now into this moment. So everybody take a deep breath in. And let it go. And let yourself arrive and be right here, right now. That's a gift that we can give ourselves all the time. Just to be aware of what our breathing is. Whether we're riding around on a bicycle, where there's not a first and second rule, other than stay out of traffic and signal your turns or whatever those the bicycle rules would happen to be. But we can use our breathing to be intentional about what it is that we're doing. And there's no punishment for holding your breath. When you hold your breath, your body responds the way your body responds. The carbon dioxide builds up and you exhale and so forth. We could just use the guidance that comes from us all around to take that next step and that next step and that next step. Slight left turn here. I got an email while I was doing office hours this week, and it was from one of our congregants who had been, I think a friend had shared a YouTube video. And what she wanted to know was, what's our take on this YouTube video? And this was a young woman who was explaining how spirituality works and telling the people who were subscribed to her YouTube channel. And the title is 3 Things God Will Do Before He Blesses You. 1, God will test you. 2, God will prepare you. And 3, God will strip you of everything. She wanted to know, what's my take on that? And I took a deep breath. And I let it go. Because I recognize all 3 of those things. And in some subtle, twistable to understand way, they are all correct. But my response was, this is really violent language. God will do all of these things, but God is not a he out there judging you and deciding what's going to happen. Okay, God will test you. That's about being intentional. You know, if I kind of want something, then I may or may not get it. But if I'm specifically intentional and say, this is what is important to me, the test is, how important is it to me? Am I willing to step up and have a different experience, to let go of the things that have been happening before? And that's how God will prepare me. In Scripture, it says you can't pour new wine into old wineskins. There are some practical reasons not to do that, but you can't take in the breath that you just let out. Your breath comes in, your breath goes out, and the next one's a new breath. So what we need to do is open ourselves to what is new. That's how we're going to prepare ourselves. We might need to do something different. If we always do what we've always done, we're always going to get what we've always got. There's lots of different ways of saying that. And the third one is, God will strip you of everything. Well, that is about what we're going to grow into. God will not strip us of everything. Your breath is still available to you. All of the good in the universe is always available to us. But if we're carrying around stuff from before, there's no room for the new. If I'm still resentful about what happened in high school, and I'm carrying that around, that's the energy that I'm bringing to the new experiences in my life. I need something to be so awesomely over-the-top good that it's going to make me forget about what happened in high school. And oh, by the way, my mind is really fast. Even if I think I put it away, it'll come back along. What God will strip you of everything means is that we get to surrender. We get to forgive the things that have hurt us before. We get to let go of whatever has brought us to this point, and instead of insisting that we do the same thing that we've been doing, is to be open to what we're going to do next. We can learn this from nature. Wander around in the springtime, you can see snake skins with no snakes in them. That's because in order to grow, the snake actually has to crawl out of its own skin. Now, anthropomorphize this. And imagine yourself having to crawl out of your own skin. Would this be something you'd look forward to? No, it seemed a little bit challenging. But that's what happens, is as we're ready to grow, we get to burst forth into the new experience that we're having. It's not necessarily easy to do. It's simple to explain, but it's not necessarily easy to do. And that's why a lot of people talk about this in such negative and challenging languages. God's not going to take anything away from us. God is going to give us the opportunity to grow into whatever new thing we want as soon as we're ready to let go of the last thing. So one more time, take a deep breath in. Let it go. And join me in knowing that every moment is a blessing. You are a gift. Receive it, share it, and be it. I love you. Thank you.